I have to say, I definitely appreciate everybody who has stuck with us through 4:30 on a Friday afternoon in Eastern time. Saturday. It's a Saturday afternoon in Eastern time. And I also appreciate everyone who stuck with us.
We're almost at the end, David.
We're almost.
I love how you lost track of the days right after Sharona started recording. I thought that's perfect time.
Now it's permanent.
That's okay.
Can I reassess? I know what day it is now.
You may always.
Unlimited reassessments. I think we just warned people against
only
that.
Only 4 times. I only give 4 chances, 5, including the final.
6. Can I do 6 reassessments for what day it is?
It's okay, David. I'll give you extra tokens and you can turn those into Sharona.
I'll probably turn tokens into second breakfasts.
Ooh,
Dan
yes.
said that in the chat.
Nice. Yes, was that Villain who had
Yeah.
tokens are for second breakfasts?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Oh my goodness. What a week. What a week.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys tomorrow for our next planning meeting for what we'll be doing next year. We'll meet over the same Zoom link as before.
Oh.
That's like next week, right?
That's a thing.
Yeah. I was thinking tomorrow, but I can give you a couple days if you need, Gloria.
I got to finish grading finals.
Oh my goodness.
Oh dear. Is this still for your spring?
Yep.
I think we should go back to the meeting times we used to use before Gloria and Bosley joined us. Are you up for 5 a.m., Gloria? Because that's when we used to meet.
For when?
We would meet at 8 a.m. on East Coast time. And we always asked Sharona why she would pick this, but she really likes getting up at 5 a.m.
I did. That was my preference. And they were all available. And we didn't have anyone in any other time zones other than Eastern. So that worked for me.
We Eastern time people would all get on bleary-eyed and like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And Sharona's, well.
She's been up for 3 hours and she's bouncy.
See, I would just stay up all night if we were meeting that early. That's easier for me than getting up early.
I understand.
All righty.
So it looks like we're up to 120 attendees. Should we get this thing rolling?
Started.
They have stayed with us on this lovely Saturday afternoon.
Exactly. All right, everyone. Well, welcome to our town hall Q&A. Let's see, what's next? Not very much. Okay, so we're going to have this town hall Q&A as our last event. We'll follow this with some quick wrap up kind of things, and then we'll hopefully continue these conversations in our Slack community as we keep going. Now, I know this is the end of our day 2 stuff, and everyone's heard this announcement, but just to remind you that this is being recorded. We're going to archive the chat. We've gotten so many great ideas and useful links from there. So we're all being recorded here. A big thank you to the College Bridge for supporting our conference, for supporting the work that it takes to put this together, both on the technical and personnel and financial sides. We really could not have pulled this together this year or last year without their support and help. Okay, so our plan for our final town hall Q&As, we've got all of the organizers on this panel. We've collected a bunch of questions from our Slack channel and the help desk channel in our Slack community. So we're going to go through some of those. If you have other questions that you would like to ask us, or if something pops into your head, feel free to use the Q&A tool and we'll try and get to as many of those questions live as we can. If you're following along in the chat, feel free to bat around ideas there. Make sure that you switch your chat over to all panelists and attendees if you'll be participating over that way. So here are our pictures again. I'm Kate Owens. I'm probably going to go through some of these. I'm going to read the questions out loud and then to see if any of our panelists want to chime in and give me their responses. I've got, I think, around 8 questions that I pulled from our Slack group. So we'll just sort of see. I tried to pick a variety of them. Okay, so we mentioned earlier that we're going to have these office hours organized by the panel or by the panelists that are here, by our organizers. Do any of you want to explain more about what our idea is for that? What that's going to look like?
Sure, so I'll say a little bit. So the first answer to this question is no. But the actual answer is we are still working on figuring out the details. But our idea for the office hours is to have about 1 hour on Zoom. So one of the things we have yet to figure out is the link that will happen each Friday, 1 to 2 o'clock Eastern time. And I'm now quickly double checking myself. Yes, 1 to 2 o'clock Eastern time. And the idea is that we'll have some themes for each of these Fridays, things along the lines of writing assessments or working on your reassessment setup and that sort of thing. Common pinch points when you're designing your own, your first mastery grading setup. And we'll have 1 or 2 of us there live to just answer whatever questions you may have about that topic. Getting closer to the beginning of fall semester, we'll probably have some open times for whatever questions you might have. I believe Drew had suggested the title of, my class starts in a week and I don't know what I'm doing. And that's a very common feeling, and we will probably have a office hour on that. But in general, watch your email and Slack for more detailed announcements about what will be happening and exactly when.
Great, David, thank you. We'll also post that same information probably up on our website when we get around to posting the recordings from the last couple of days. Thank you with our patience. Thank you for your patience as we do that. It takes us around a week to really deal with all of the recordings, making sure the links go to the right spots. And then we'll have those Friday sessions up there. We also have to look at our own calendars and do a thumb war to figure out who gets which Friday. If there are some topics that you are interested in, feel free to reach out to us and we can try and incorporate those into our office hours. And feel free to come by just to say hi. That way, you know, so many of my office hours are me sitting in a Zoom room by myself. So even if you don't want to come and ask us about the topic, feel free to bounce in and say hello. Let us know how your summer is going. Okay, next up, this is another one from our Slack community. So this question says, how do we balance creating a better and more equitable learning experience for students while still taking into account instructor workload and the finite time that we have? Any of our panelists want to address, how do you find the balance there?
Let me just vote and say, don't ask me because I'm terrible at this. But I think it definitely comes down to planning and monitoring your own need to overgive to your students. I think that sometimes we spend a lot of time and energy on things that students don't need quite so much so early. You can give a little less and wait until they ask. That would be my biggest feedback.
And then one of the other things that I would like to say on this is that the more you're able to pre-plan the course and the more you're able to lay it out ahead of time, the better it is in the long run. So you're able to give yourself more of that time during the course if you can plan it before.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I definitely think the more you can pre-plan ahead of time, the less work you'll have on yourself later.
Yeah, and Stephen in the chat mentions automate. Yeah, leverage technology where you can. One of the things I love about our PQ point standard is we have incorporated the auto grading on some of the online math systems. So if you have online math systems that do points-based grading, maybe don't fight it. I love an accumulation standard. So like I have 1,000 points, just get this many and you've got the whole credit. So it's not that partial credit thing. But if you can automate integrations, like we have all those points things automatically go into my grade book, so I never have to touch them. That's huge.
Awesome.
I'd add on to that. Don't be afraid to place limits on things that students can do in your classes, like limit the number of reassessments that students can have. It's okay to do that. I mean, in some sense, it would be great if we could give unlimited, no questions asked reassessment attempts on everything that students do. That'd be great for students and it would crush us, right? So I think it's okay, and it's still absolutely making massive strides towards a more equitable learning environment, to give students a little bit of boundary around, reasonable boundaries around what they can do and what they can't do. Like in my classes, on the big assignments that are writing intensive, they get 2 submissions per week. Okay, so all the way through the end of the semester, they can get a 3rd one if they spend a token. And that puts a little bit of a cage around what students can do, but it also motivates them because they do it. And it means I'm not grading a ton of stuff every week. And it also means I don't get dumped on at the end of the semester because I can only do 2 things a week.
And I want to tag on something from the parent of a freshman perspective. I really think we need to be inclusive and be flexible. There are some students for whom flexibility is very detrimental. So providing structure and deadlines and then being flexible as needed, finding a way to balance that's really important. For my kid, having everything able to be due at the end of the semester is a god-awful disaster. So I really like structure. And then if I have a student that is not able to meet it, I want to work with them to meet them where they are. So deadlines aren't, we're not saying no deadlines because it will crush you, but it will also crush some of your students.
And I want to just re-emphasize and broaden what Robert had said of when you're doing your first mastery grading setup, be simple, avoid that, that tendency to want to tweak and get real detailed to get just the right things. Be simple and be limited. And then you'll have a chance to reassess next time around.
Great. Okay. Here's another one that's come up, I know, for a lot of us during, especially the pandemic times, but what are some strategies about best designing assessments and reassessments to reduce or demotivate academic dishonesty? Robert, I know that you wrote a great blog post about academic honesty. I'm going to drop that link into the chat. Do you want to talk for a minute about what your thoughts are?
Sure, thanks for that. So my hypothesis, I don't have any data on this, unfortunately. I wish I did. Be a great study, by the way, to do if anyone is interested, is that just simply having mastery grading in place is itself a demotivator. Just simply because what's the value proposition anymore? I mean, students will commit academic dishonesty mostly because it's the fear of the one and done situation. I mean, in my view, at least, again, there could be other reasons too, like students may cheat because they want to save time. But if they can also just simply take what they do, give it their best shot, they're going to get feedback and they're going to get reassessments. They don't really have the incentive to commit academic dishonesty, and the cost benefit on all of this just goes way out of kilter from what they're used to. And so how can we design assessments and reassessments to reduce and demotivate it? Apart from simply having the mastery grading situation in place and making sure that students really understand what's going on, that they don't need to go copy something, just give it your best shot and we'll work with what you got, okay? It resets the relationship between us and the students to say, I'm not trying to fail you here, I'm trying to get you through this and get the highest grade you possibly can. Designing the assessments, I think one thing that helps is to make this is simply to make the assessments something that students want to do. When I talk about flipped learning, I get this a lot. Like, how do you, if you're doing a flipped classroom, how do you make sure students do the work before class? And the answer is you can't. I mean, there's no way to make students do anything. This is 100% optional for students. And so the best you can do is just give them something that's authentic, that means something, and that they can see the value of it. And I think in a mastery grading situation, that's a lot easier to do than in traditional grading because you have your list of learning objectives. If you've done this right, then the assessments you're giving are direct line of sight to the learning objectives. And so there's no hidden, there's no secret menu, between like you have to order off of to get the learning objectives right. You just do the thing in front of you and you're going to get the learning objectives. And that directness, I think, really, really helps to have let students say it's okay to just give it a shot and try it. Maybe you fail, who cares? I mean, it's going to be okay. And you also have to provide a learning environment in which vulnerability and failure are normed or normative, and they're okay. And so that's part, the grading system does part of that. We have to do a lot of that ourselves too.
That's great. Sharona, is that your hand up?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this too. I think one of the things that we're having trouble with is defining academic dishonesty. I have many colleagues in my department that define academic dishonesty as you used tools like a calculator on your exam when I told you not to. And I'm like, come on, people, like let's let's rethink this. For me, I've reduced my definition to academic dishonesty at this point to posting on Chegg. Like that's the only thing I ask you not to do. I don't even ask you really not to use Chegg because Chegg's terrible for my classes and it doesn't work. I don't want you to post because I don't want other people sucked in. And so I do minimal things to my assessment design to make it a tiny little barrier. I version, so that one exam and a student's looking at it and they're looking at their friend's exam, if they're not exactly the same, it makes the barrier a little bit higher. It's a little bit more worth it to do their own work. It's not perfect, and it is easy to catch if they use the wrong version. And that's where technology comes in, being able to version numbers or version things. I kind of would love for them to work together, but I am trying to assess individual mastery. But really, you have to really think about what are you defining, which goes back to what are you assessing? Are you assessing their math ability and content knowledge? Are you assessing their ability to use Desmos or Wolfram Alpha? Are you assessing, like in the case of my 15-year-old, their access to a calculus teacher in their home? So what are you assessing? And if you're aligning your assessments to your standards, then you really need to think about, okay, well, am I really expecting in a remote environment, at least, for them to not use a calculator? Or should I just be giving problems for which a calculator is kind of necessary or something like that? So I definitely use technology to do some versioning. I do limit my time. So I'll give a quiz that's one question that I feel could typically be done in 5 to 10 minutes. And I'll give 30 minutes to do it. So we don't have a huge time pressure, but it's short enough that posting to Chegg and getting it back is not quite going to happen. Now, can I prevent the person who's going to hire a tutor to sit with them? I can't, but I teach at a Hispanic serving institution where my students can't afford and don't have access to that. So, I do little things to make it slightly harder or slightly more catchable, but I also redefine what academic dishonesty is.
Thanks, Sharona. Gloria, I see you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I'll just say that I've really started to completely revamp the kinds of assessments I give to my students based on what I really want my students to get out of my class. So if I want my students to be good at writing a scientific argument, I have to give them questions that ask them to do that, as opposed to a traditional kind of standard physics problem. And the advantage of that is that they have to answer that in their own voice. And when we're in person, I can tell right away, where I have a sense of where that student is, and I'm able to tell whether their response is their genuine response, and it's hard to get an answer to those types of questions from a site like Chegg, right? Where they have to really kind of explain their reasoning and that kind of thing. And I think for me, an underutilized tool is using kind of metacognitive stuff for reassessments, where students identify their mistakes and what they did wrong. That's a super useful learning tool. So I think that reduces academic dishonesty, because that's not something that they can Google or look up anywhere, right? If they have to identify what they did wrong, and maybe they identify what they did wrong after talking to their friend who got it right, I don't care. They're still talking about the physics and learning what they did wrong. And I'm okay with that.
Great. Bosley.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button there. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Gloria was saying. That's especially in our lower and mid-level math classes, like we're not asking questions that haven't already been answered. So if you're just asking, those procedural based questions, then there might be something wrong with your assessment. So that's writing questions that can't simply be Googled or Chegged. Is one of the things that we do to help with that dishonesty. And then we also, reserve the right, and we put it in our syllabus that if there's ever a question, we as instructors have the right to ask you about your quiz. And it becomes very obvious very quickly whether or not that work was actually theirs and they understand it or not, which I also use with students that, because I have a lot of English as second language students that have issues and difficulties with written, written communication in English because they're still learning the language. But that also helps me identify, okay, was this an English problem or was this an actual misunderstanding? And several of my students end up getting mastery where they might not have because of those interviews. So those interviews have been a really big tool for not just the dishonesty, but also getting a honest, assessment from the students.
Great. Bouncing off these same ideas, one of the things that I guess we all sort of heard about was thinking about reassessments and how they should work, which leads right directly into our next question, which is, can you talk about a bit about your logistics of reassessments? How many can students do? How are they able to do them? What are the rules that you have in place? How do they schedule those? Anyone want to give us a brief blurb, David?
So I want to put in a blurb quick for once we have it posted, the reassessments panel that just completed. So you can get a lot of additional things in that one. And I will briefly say about my own reassessment takes in a upper level class that's focused a lot on writing. So writing proofs, but written communications. I use only revisions with a reflective cover sheet. And I find that I see a huge deal of growth from students using revisions as opposed to attempting a new type of problem. This is especially true for longer form written assignments. The other thing I do is I limit students to 1 revision per week. That's actually down from 2 in past years. And the reason is it strongly encourages students to focus on which ones of these matter, as opposed to, I've got it, I'm going to do all of it. Which ones matter the most and spending more of their time in a more valuable place.
Yeah, I agree. I think that putting some kind of limits, as Robert mentioned earlier, on what students are doing is really important. The way that I've been handling reassessments was changed radically when we all did the great transition online. But I did keep into place my limit of 1 standard per week. I'm usually using a standards-based curriculum. Students during the week can reassess that 1 standard as many times as they like, so they can start working on it on Monday and get lots of feedback from me and go through some revision cycles about that standard that they're working on. But they need to just focus on that 1 thing per week. That's both to reduce my grading load, going back to that balance between my time and their time, but also because I didn't want students taking the shotgun approach of trying 10 things just to see which one would stick, which one they could actually, like which hoop they could jump through right now. I wanted them to pick a hoop and I'd work on it with them until they can get it, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
And I wanted to jump in and answer Casey's clarifying question from the chat. What I was describing was revising 1 problem, but this is a class where we essentially only do about 12 problems. They are major problems. In other classes, I will usually limit to revising 1 objective per week, just like Kate was talking about.
For me, yeah, these are course standards, and for a 16-week semester, usually I have around 25 standards for the 16 weeks. So because of the pigeonhole principle, they have to get some things correct on some of my in-class normal assessments, and then they can use the out-of-class reassessments for those things that they didn't quite get. Any of the other panelists want to weigh in with a quick blurb about your reassessment process? Sharona?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the scheduling thing. Scheduling's been really critical because we have to make sure that the assessment is given, our instructors have time to provide the feedback before the next assessment's due. So we have very carefully paced, because again, we're not doing individual reassessments. It felt unfair to push that onto individual instructors in a coordinated environment. So that's another reason that we only have 4 plus the final. So really making sure that anyone working in the program, like our instructors know they have to spend their weekends grading, because stuff is turned in on a Friday and they're supposed to get it back either Monday or Tuesday, depending on when their class meets. So timing really does play into how many reassessments you give, because students need feedback before they try again.
I can add one thing to that. When you're offering reassessment opportunities, this is a great way to bring some metacognitive things into what you're doing. So this has added benefits of it. It makes them think a little bit before they just try another reassessment, right? They have to go back and tell you something about what went wrong the last time, and here's how they practiced. Here's what they learned from it. So one, they learn something from it. Two, it kind of slows down the number of students trying to do this at once just a little bit, and then it increases their success rate with this. So I encourage everyone to kind of experiment and figure out what this looks like that works for you. I think it'll look a little bit different depending on your particular context.
Great. Okay, moving on to a different topic. This is one that I saw a few different people asking about in a few different ways. So this question says, how do you assess individual performance on standards or specs or bundles when you have students working in teams on projects or assignments? Anyone have any experience doing sort of team-based learning projects and how you assess them? Oh my goodness, I saw a bunch of hands at once. Bosley, I'm gonna go with you first. Gloria, I know, saw you.
So one of the key points to any kind of team-based project when it comes to mastery grading is there needs to also be an individual piece to that. So it's, even though you're working on it and it's a team project or assignment, there's still some sort of individual piece that can be used to help you, assess the students on that standard. And then something else that I always do is include a team evaluation of themselves and their other members. And I use those evaluations, they're anonymous. So the team members don't know, what the other people on the teams have said. But I use that as also part of my evidence for the assessment of the standard for each individual member of the team.
Gloria, I saw your hand shoot up as well.
What Bosley said, basically. Yeah, having a standard that addresses not just the assignment or the project, but what you expect the students to do. So it might be a standard of being a good team member, and maybe you do that through evaluations like Bosley said, or it might be that they have to contribute a certain portion of the project or the assignment. So having that individual something that the individual has to be held accountable to in addition to the team one. So what Bosley said.
That's great. What Stephen Klontz mentioned in the chat that got some attention for TBL was that the learning can be team-based. So it's happening during class, during your time together. That's the team-based part, but maybe the assessment wouldn't have to be. So you could still have an individualized assessment, even if the learning part of your class involves teams. Sharona?
I use the team portion to get points towards my habits of mind standard. So to me, the team part is part of my participation in the practice. So that goes into that standard. And it can be pretty impactful. It can be a big part of that standard. But that way I don't have to do any sort of real individual assessment there.
Great. Anyone else have any more comments about teams and groups before we move? Okay, great. Here comes a question about those of you that have been using specifications grading. What do you do about uneven achievement across criteria and different bundles? So if you catch it early enough, maybe it's something that you can fix right away or work with the student on. But what if you don't catch it early? Do you have any experience for students whose performance is not the same across different bundles of stuff? David, I saw you smile and then raise your hand. So I'm looking forward to what you will say.
Yeah, because I'm smiling because it's going to be an annoying answer. It is absolutely right.
I can mute you.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, go ahead.
Please do if I go off the rails. But it is absolutely true that catching it early is ideal. And I want to add on to that one thing I do at the beginning of many of my classes is actually show some examples of an imaginary student who by the end of the semester has reached this, and that level, or they've done this and that thing. A visual thing, usually using the same format that these are presented for grades in the syllabus. And I ask students, and maybe we use a polling thing or we just do show of hands, what grade did this student earn? And I always set it up so there's, a direct one. Oh, they did everything they needed for a B. Okay, that's just double checking they got to that point. And then I set up some of the situations that this is talking about, right? A student who did everything for an A except one critical thing, and that puts them at a C. It always provokes a lot of good conversation and gets this issue into students' minds, and that's worth a lot, right? It makes them aware of the incentives and the details they're not used to coming from a traditionally graded background. So I know that's not an actual answer to this question, but that does a lot of work to make students aware that it's something they need to be aware of.
Great. Robert, I saw your hand raised too about specs and bundles. What do you have to
Yeah,
add?
I want to just echo one thing that David said, and that is one way to inoculate students against getting into this situation in the first place. First of all, it's on us. I got to communicate. I was terrible at this last year, and I've got to get better at this about communicating with students early and often to catch them when the unevenness begins to show. But a key way to inoculate students against getting into that situation in the first place is to practice using the grading system on a fake but full set of data. And like every week there should be some kind of exercise. This is a great sort of first week of class activity too, to go along with like a syllabus quiz. Just have them run through 5 or 6 practice runs. And we get students into that situation where it's like, well, you've got these 4 categories and they're like at an A level on 3 of them, but like a D level on 1 of them. And so what's the grade? And a lot of students will say like A- or B because they're trying to average things. It's like, no, actually it's a D because that's the way the syllabus is set up. And so what do you do in the situation where it happens? Well, I think you have to, first of all, you alert students as soon as you catch it to say like, look, read your syllabus and this is what your grade is looking like. You have to actually, level up on all of these things in order to get the grade at that particular level. But this is also a good place to build in plus minus flexibility into your syllabus. Like for example, this is my syllabus from calculus from last semester. Yeah, last semester, the one that just concluded for us. And if a student has reached, say, a B level on 4 out of 5 categories and hit C level on the 5th one, then that's probably like a B minus. So that's hard coded into the system. An earlier syllabi that I had, it's like if you hit a certain grade level on all but 1 of these, and that 1 is no more than 2 levels below, then that's a minus. I had to kind of like systematize like that, but if it's further than that, then it's going to drop the grade even further. You can actually spell this out in the syllabus. It complexifies things, and so that's bad. But on the other hand, it also gets it in writing, so the students can see this, and you can play off of it. So that's. You can build in, short answer is you can build in room in your syllabus so that if students make it on all but 1 thing, then you can make that a modifier rather than like you just shot your grade down.
Great. Sharona, come on in.
Yeah, I just wanted to, we made this mistake and we talked about this in the large class assessments when we first did our grading system, that we had attendance and participation badges we were trying to gamify, and you had to hit certain badge levels to get certain grades. Although I like having a habits of mind standard because it encourages grading, I really don't want to affect their grade too much by something that is not directly tied to the content of the course. So we've really just gone to anything you think is that important. I think when we all feel uncomfortable is like, if the uneven achievement is in something, it's like, oh man, they got all the assessments and all the content, but they didn't do enough homework. That's where we all become uncomfortable. And that may mean that it shouldn't drop your grade if you do poorly on that, but it could increase your grade if you do well on that. So I really think it goes back to what are we assessing and what matters. I want to assess habits of mind because I think most students need me to assess it to incentivize them to do it. But I want to let a student get an A who does 0 homework if they show it on all of the quizzes. So that's kind of where I come down on that one.
Great, thanks. Something that came up in the chat was talking about plus and minus grades and who likes having plus and minus modifiers and who prefers that they not have them. That leads into our next question about what requirements we're all sort of working under. So here's a question. My institution has many firm requirements about how many quizzes I have to give and what percentage they have to be. It's stuff about my final exam and all of these rules. Do you have any tips on making mastery grading, specs grading, standards-based grading system work while balancing a bunch of constraints that I don't control? I'm waiting for any of our other panelists to raise their hand to this.
I'll raise my hands. I just don't always want to go first.
Sharona, come on. You
Okay.
can go.
So my first thing, and this just, I'm trying to remember about privilege and things like this, but really examine, can you ask the question and frame it in the context of equity? Can you get a waiver to pilot something? I mean, if you get a firm no, then you have to deal with this, but I think a lot of us are afraid to ask. And I think hopefully you've gotten enough evidence out of this conference that you can have a conversation with your department chair and hopefully your dean and hopefully whoever you need to at least get a pilot exception to say, hey, you know what? These firm requirements, they're historically inequitable. You know, use that equity conversation to at least ask. I would start there. And then if you have enough privilege, like if you're tenured, tell them to go pound sand. Like, I don't know. If we can't use whatever privilege we have, then why are we doing this? So that's my privilege.
I am in an institution where I'm not tenure eligible, and I'm also in an institution that has very highly coordinated courses. So I've jumped through perhaps not that many hoops all at one time for one course, but certainly each of those different sorts of hoops. So come find me. We can have a one-on-one chat on ways that I've sort of found the boundaries. I think that Sharona's advice about, talking to people and saying, hey, do you really think that this common final exam is really beneficial and equitable for our students? Those conversations are important outside of your own students, your own class. Robert's got his hand up, so I'll let him talk.
Yeah, so I completely get the constraints working under, but so I would just say, work for whatever change you can. And this is also a reason, I've said this in the chat a couple of times, those of us who are in a position to become the people who are making these firm requirements, and therefore the people who can get into a position and destroy these firm requirements, should be totally moving in that direction in our careers if possible. Become a department chair, become an associate dean, something where you can get inside and start taking a sledgehammer of some of these dumb requirements that are getting laid on the rest of us. That being said, I'm not calling for rising up for a revolution necessarily. I didn't say that explicitly. You look for ways that you can operate within the letter of the law, but still hit the spirit of mastery grading, right? So like plus minus grades, I mentioned this in the chat. I don't like plus minus grades. I really wish we didn't have them. I would just like to have A, B, C, D, F, and just be done with it. I asked my dean about this when I was first starting mastery grading, like, do I have to give plus minus grades? And he said, yeah, you have to give students the ability to earn a plus minus grade because it's on our books. But it turns out there's no rules for how I give plus minus grades. So I have to give them, but I can choose whatever means I wish to assign plus minus grades, as long as it's consistent and fair. So I thought, okay, that's where my whole thing about, I can just give plus minus grades to represent nearness to the next grade level, for example. It doesn't have to be a point requirement. So maybe some of these requirements are constraining, but there's just enough legalistic wiggle room inside them to make something mastery grading work within them. I mean, it would be worth a look just to kind of put the lawyer glasses on and see what those requirements say, and then especially what they don't say, and then maybe you can operate within the system and still get some things done.
That's great.
Before we move on, I just want to highlight a suggestion made in the chat by Anansa. Things like mastery-based testing are ways to kind of get into this. Like, okay, yes, you have to have 80% of exams, but that 80% comes from a mastery-based kind of thing. So if you're in that situation, there's a few papers, I think I put this in the Slack somewhere. There's a few papers in Primus that talk about this kind of approach.
Also,
Thanks,
I think a lot of us have found ways to finagle. So come to our office hours and we will help you finagle your system to make it look like it's doing this.
And if we're not able to, we will offer you much emotional support. if nothing else. Great. All right, next up. Is it possible to use standards-based grading, specs grading for just part of a class? I mean, do I really have to jump all the way in? What if I want to keep my points and my partial credit on some stuff? Can I just try this a little bit? David's jumping out of his chair.
I was saving it because this is also my answer to the previous one, and Sharona just called attention to it coming up in the chat. We haven't talked about mastery-based testing a lot in this session or in this conference, but this is a great idea that I want to briefly sell. And I will introduce it by saying, when I'm first using mastery grading in a brand new course, because I've come to really feel dirty about using just straight up points, even for a brand new course for me, what I use is mastery-based testing. And the essential idea is only the tests, or maybe it's only the quizzes, are done in a mastery-based way with a collection of objectives. Perhaps you have regular tests or weekly quizzes. They each cover 1 or 2 objectives. Each week, maybe each objective appears on 3 consecutive ones, quizzes or whatever you have, and students need to demonstrate mastery once. And then what you do is, for their test grade, you figure out how many of these objectives have they demonstrated mastery of at any point, divide it by the number there were, and that's their test grade. And then plop it right into the test grade requirement you have, and do everything else in a traditional way, right? Do homework, do whatever else in a traditional points-based way. So again, from the outside, it doesn't look any different. A person doesn't even need to know that you're doing it this way, because it looks like you have a weighted percentage system for all of the different parts of your grade. But the testing part is done with this built-in retesting opportunity, where students have multiple opportunities, and once they've succeeded on an objective, they don't need to attempt those questions ever again. So that's my quick sales pitch for that. There are some great papers, as you just heard, in the Primus special issue that really focus on this aspect of mastery grading, and it's a wonderful entry point.
Great, thanks, David. Bosley, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so the reason I got into mastery-based grading is because of the equity issues with traditional. So if you're not ready to completely jump in, I don't know about using different components, but you can definitely use some of the philosophies of mastery-based grading in a traditional system to make it at least more equitable. Things like still allowing reassessments, or not counting missing works as zeros, doing away with the 0. So you can still take some of those equity issues that are brought up with traditional grading and tweak those and do things to make it more equitable. So even if you're not doing the components, you're still doing some of the philosophies of mastery or standard-based grading.
Great. Anyone else want to say anything?
I just want to echo that last point, that whatever you do, if you're coming from a place of this kind of underlying philosophy of supporting the students in their learning, if you make your decisions through that lens, then the rest of it is just details, right?
Great. All right, so those are the questions that I pulled out from our Slack community earlier today. We have some questions in the Q&A. Anyone who has more questions, please go ahead and ask them in the Q&A tool, and we will get to as many of those as that we can. So moving over there, we have a question here from Allison Hildum. She says, in traditional based testing, I've given a bunch of review problems in preparation for upcoming tests. How do you deal with review problems in mastery-based grading? Does anything change? Sharona.
I think review problems are even more critical if we're trying to be transparent and we want our students to answer questions that are sort of more conceptual or more directly aligned. They should see examples of them. So I actually give review problems that are directly aligned with my assessments as much as possible. They can, again, I have this habits of mind standard, so I can give points for those or not. But they're just sort of different versions of my assessment and reassessment questions. And also then in the linear algebra, the Check-It system, which I get my assessments from, there's 20 public problems on every standard that are publicly available on the web. And I send my students there and I say, do these. And so they're, again, directly aligned. I think they're critical.
Yeah, I think that my short answer to this is the same as Sharona's. It's the same or even more important. Having students understand what's coming is very important as well.
Great.
I
We'll
think-
do one more of these before we get to our final wrap up for today. Spencer Bagley asked, what would you do if you had a grading genie in a bottle who would grant one wish about grading? What's the one thing that you wish? Oh, Bosley had his hand up first. That was super fast. Bosley, what's your one wish?
My one wish would be to get everyone else to see the inequities with traditional grading. So I don't have to continue to try to, convince people that there's an issue. Just have the genie do it for me.
That'd be great. All of the PR work, right? Robert, you have your hand up.
I had an answer, but then I saw Chad's in the chat. I think I like his better. Will the genie do my grading for me? I actually, I think I would probably ask the genie to just make grading completely go away. Like, why should we even be doing this in the first place? I feel like, it's all great to be. I love the mastery grading community. It's great. It's a great idea, but it seems like this is like one step along, like maybe a 300-year-long process of just eliminating grades entirely. That would be like my favorite result of all this, is just to say, I love you, genie, but put yourself back in the bottle and throw yourself back in the ocean along with all the rest of the stuff. And we should just talk with students about how they're doing. I mean, maybe that's what ungrading is. I have a lot to learn about that.
Well, I would say, Robert, when you said that, I was like, but no, wait, we have to grade, because in my mind, grading is feedback. Like, I'm not worrying about, am I giving them an A, a B, or a C, or points? I'm like, no, I grade all the time. That's all I ever do. I sit and I give feedback and I give feedback and I give feedback. So to me, I've already made that transition that grading is just giving feedback. So
Yeah,
I don't want that to go away.
Yeah, maybe that's what I want, Sharon. So I wish we could just take the word grading and like just remove the connotation to that takes it away from feedback. It's like there's a Venn diagram in my brain with grading over here and feedback over here, and there's a little sliver of overlap in between there, and that's kind of where I want to be. And maybe the genie is, I asked the genie, just get everybody into that sliver, including all of our deans, all of our presidents, all of our provosts, and just let's get on the same page and help students with feedback rather than labeling them constantly.
Well, and there's some stuff in the chat that disagrees with me. And I guess I'm in my head, grading to me as a teacher is what I do every weekend. It's looking at problems. And maybe that's my issue, is that to me, assigning a letter grade is what sucks and shouldn't be there. But grading to me is the process of marking and assessing and providing feedback and saying you've gotten what I want you to go. And I'm not trying to say they are the same thing, but it's just interesting that with all this conversation, when I hear grading, I think of what I do every weekend. I don't think of A, B, C, 20%. Like I don't know, maybe I'm off in left field. But
No,
this puts us in a great place, Sharona, because something else that's come up in the Q&A and that people have raised in the chat that I was saving sort of for our little wrap up here at the end was about the thing that you bought the rights to earlier. Do you want to talk about that?
Okay, so let's go back to this conversation about words and the word mastery and all this stuff. I mean, you guys have heard me say that I want it to just be grading, and I want to bring something up that I'm very concerned about, that there's different audiences for this stuff. I've really come to believe and understand the unintentional harm the word mastery does to the groups that for whom this word is so weighted. But I'm also really looking at my privileged professors in the tenure lines at my institutions who I haven't been able to take on an active pedagogy to save their lives in 20 years, I've been 30 years. And they're the ones I want to try to get there. So I'm really grappling with, on the one hand, we have this harm being done by the word. On the other hand, we have this massive harm being done by the grading system. That to me is just like so much even bigger, even though the word's a harm. So our proposal for now is that we are going to change first the name of the conference and continue to work on the language we can use depending on who we talk to. So our proposal for the conference name is the grading conference. And we actually want to big tent it to really continue to bring in our ungrading folks, our contract grading folks, anyone who really is willing to examine, heck, our traditional grading folks that we need to convert. So wanted to get your feedback because we already bought the URL, but I mean, it wasn't a big risk. It was $12. So what do y'all think of thegradingconference.com? Okay, so we've got some grading. We've got some assessment votes. We can look at that. There is a conference on, what's it called? The Conference on Assessment.
The Conference on Assessment and Grading, and that conference already exists. I think it's being run out of Texas, and their conference fee is $700. So instead of being the conference on grading and assessment for $700, will be the grading conference at a lower price point.
Yeah, assessment does have an issue at the university levels because program assessment is a completely different thing. And so if you're talking to like your institutional research folks, if you say assessment, they're talking about program assessment and not student assessment. So it is an issue.
Yeah, assessment goes along with university accreditation. And I think that would be tumultuous for us to wade in that direction.
Right.
So we'll stick with the grading conference for 2022, and we'll just see how it goes and perhaps reassess our name once again in the future. We can continue making changes as we go.
So, okay, I do like Katie's option, which we could certainly think about, is I've gone to emojis on my rubrics. Maybe there's an emoji title that we could go to, symbolic. Or is there another language? Like, this is a very American-centric conference. So anyways, for now, we'd like to go there. But I do also think that we really need to think about this word mastery. And how do you, like, my issue with some of the things like ungrading, which I think I could really get behind, is if you were going to talk to someone who hasn't even started this work and you start with ungrading and have to explain that you don't mean that you're not giving a final grade, it feels problematic to me, but I could like be persuaded. Language is critical. I just am so worried about this massive damaging thing we have called traditional grading. So does anyone else want to weigh in, or is this just going to be my opinion?
I guess I'll say, I just want to raise a point that I saw Spencer making in the chat, and I think Katie made it earlier as well, that we don't need to use euphemisms around this, right? We want to avoid the word mastery because it has connotations with slavery. And I really see no reason to continue using that word in any conversations I have. You can make your own decisions about how you communicate with your colleagues. But I think I'm just going to completely remove that word from my vocabulary going forward. And we can call this the grading conference and try and, establish momentum to move away from that. I think will be helpful.
And I'd like to second that, Drew. I think in our personal conversations, we absolutely can do whatever makes the most sense to us. The grapple that we're having with an organizing conference or organizing group is we need an umbrella. So I can talk about my system, which is standards, but that might not match someone who's doing specs or someone who's doing ungrading or someone who's doing contract grading. So the point is we don't want to leave anyone out. And someone said in the chat that they wouldn't have come if it was just the grading conference. So it's definitely something where we're going to have to continue to try to communicate. So we have the URL. We also still have the mastery grading URL. So maybe they just point to the same thing. I don't know.
There's been a couple other suggestions, Sharona, that a few people have calling it just the new grading.
So people like things like equity, and as Katie pointed out, the type of grading we're talking about is not inherently equitable. It is probably more equitable if you do it right, but you can actually make a very inequitable standards-based or mastery-based system. You can. It's not that hard. So, I mean, I love all these language, but again, it's one thing within ourselves, and it's another thing to someone who we haven't even been able to get off of lecturing in 30 years. So It feels like a very tough problem. Okay, so we have a lot of good ideas. We're going to keep working on this. It's not like we're not the official arbiters of the name of any of this. We are 4 people who grew to 7 people who agreed to put a bunch of work in to put on this conference just because we wanted to. We are in no way the police of mastery grading. Yeah, we're trying, guys. We just don't have we have a lot of opinions in a lot of different communities to try to satisfy.
We'll continue definitely a lot of these discussions as we get going. I want to take a moment to thank everyone for coming. It's been a great 2 days. I think everyone has learned so much from all of our presenters and all of the great presentations that we've had. So thank you for coming to our conference. We're looking forward to the grading conference next year, the new grading conference next year, whatever we end up becoming next year. We hope that you'll help us become that. So thank you for coming. Thanks to the College Bridge for their continued support. This is not the end, so this is really just the beginning for us for what we're going to be doing next. So in our growth mindset philosophy, we still have so many more changes we want to make. So ways that you can get more involved, continue reaching out in the Slack workspace that we've built. We'd love to hear from everyone there. We'll be posting more information about those drop-in hours. We have not finalized a time. I know that somebody mentioned that in the chat earlier about finding other days or other times. We have been so busy putting this conference together. I don't even know if it's a Friday today or if it's a Tuesday. So I can't even tell you what's on my calendar after this. So stay tuned for more information about that. We have a great set of resources that are available that are currently on our conference webpage there. So go and check those out. Sometime in the next few days, you'll be hearing from us again with a survey over your email about how the conference went, what you got out of it, what you're grappling with, what you want to see next year. And we're really—
I also put the survey link in the chat so you can actually go to it right now.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sharona. And we really appreciate everyone coming. Any of my other organizers want to chime in?
I want to thank Linda Nielsen and Josh Eiler for their work and for participating. So the survey that I put in here is one from College Bridge. There might be another one coming out, but we do ask that you fill out the one for College Bridge as well. Oh, sorry, is that the old one? My bad, don't use that one.
Yep, so
Sharona will
hold
reassess
on.
her link posting.
We will email you. Please watch your spam folders.
And
Sorry,
I want to thank all the attendees. You guys have been absolutely awesome with your participation and your enthusiasm. So thank you guys. This would be very boring if it was just the 7 of us talking to nothing.
Oh, did we want to call for, if you really want to get involved? Oh, that's the other conversation we didn't have, was the format for next year. Were we going to have that conversation now? Or bring it up? I don't remember.
Probably not in the last 4 minutes. Nah.
If you're
why
interested in
don't we
helping to
bounce it over
organize,
to Slack? We can think about that as we go through the next few months. What should this conference look like? Do you want to keep it online? Do you want to move it in person? Do you want to do some kind of high flex model? We'd love to hear from our attendees and our presenters about what they would look forward to, changes that we can make, stuff we can do that's cool next year. A regional pod model. I want to go to a regional pod. That sounds like a cool place.
Are we in the same region, Kate?
We would have to be. We get to draw the lines, right, Drew?
Yeah, I guess so.
can we gerrymander it?
That's exactly right.
We'll gerrymander our region to include a nice sandy beach or something.
There seems to be some, are we going to be online or are we going to be in person conversation in the chat? I think that our plan right now is to have something for both groups. It's just like, what would that look like? Does it happen concurrently? Do we do something in person Monday, Tuesday, and then do the same things online Wednesday, Thursday? We're definitely planning on trying to keep this available to both preferences, right? Those who really want to travel and get out and go see an airport again, and those that like don't ever want to leave their house. Right, Robert?
It's been nice not to have to leave my house, I'll be honest. Although I love to travel.
I definitely
true.
think online's
We
a
have no money
given.
for it, like everybody else. So.
I think online's a given. It's really more of a question of what, if anything, does in-person look like?
No.
I can't imagine us not doing an online component.
Okay, well, should we stop the recording here and then we can hang out for a few more minutes and just chat with anyone that wants to stay? We're coming right up on our 5:30 cutoff.